All right. Awesome. I know we just got somebody else who joined here. Hey, Sandra. Make sure that you all dial in. Please dial in. And I will copy and paste the, there we go. You guys should all have it right here. Perfect, okay. All right, let's get started. So again, every time we do these webinars, this is essentially what we're going to be doing. So at the start, I always like to start off with the two most important things, in my opinion, that allows people to really be successful when they study for the MCAT, and it's to have two things. The first thing you want to have is you want to have a process to study. If you don't have a process to study, then you will spend more time making decisions and less time actually studying. So you want to make sure that you have a process that you study with, and there are many out there. The one that I use is, as you can see, it's the boogeyman method. But these things come and go in many different variations. So what you want to do is you want to establish a process to study, commit to it, and the way that you can commit to it is by, number two, having motivation. So I ask everybody that I talk to one-on-one, I always ask them a question, basically asking, what if I gave you all the content, all the strategy, all the application tools, resources, and everything you needed to be successful? Why would you still fail? Why would you still fail? One second, we got somebody else who's joining. Hold on. There we go. So why would a person fail if they have everything they need to succeed? And it boils down to your own internal, confidence. That's a great point. Confidence is a great point, but Walter, let me ask you a question. What is confidence? If you break down the word, confide means with trust, right? It's basically self-confidence is you trust yourself. Why would you lack confidence? It's because you don't trust yourself. Why would you not trust yourself? It's because you didn't put in the work. And why wouldn't you have put in the work? Because again, back to these 2 points, no process and no motivation. So I know that this is a very simplified version of that, but my point is that, there are more emotional issues that are more important, right? Fear, honesty, motivation, these things are really the culprits that make or break a person's score. So I can give you everything for free. I'm running these study groups for free. Everything is out there for you guys, but it's a matter of, do you have the desire, the trust, the motivation to commit to it? And are you honest with yourself? Are you making sure that you're giving yourself enough time, that you're not rushing yourself, that you're not somehow going to be taking the test in 2 weeks when you know maybe you need about 4 more months to study? These are the reasons why people fail. It's not because they lack content, strategy, or application, but yes, they lack confidence, but that's not the root. The root of lacking confidence is that they hadn't built it. For example, if I asked you, what's your name? With confidence, you should be able to tell me it's, Susie Q, or whatever your name is, right? Why? Because you've built that over and over and over again. You didn't know at first, like for the first few years of your life, you had no idea. And then you started to know, and you started to know, you learned it. It's the same thing with anything else, right? Confidence doesn't have to be there. You don't have to have confidence, but confidence must be built. So if you don't have confidence, that's more a reflection of the amount of work you've put in and less a reflection of your character. So these are the two things. You want to make sure that you have developed, or you've found or paid for or whatever a process to study, but then you have to tell yourself, why are you even doing this? And I'll give you an example of what my motivation was. When I first started taking the test and studying for it, the first I took it 3 times. So the first few times I took it, I was telling myself, I want to go to med school, I want to be a doctor, I want to do all these different things. But to be honest, guys, those were all lies. They were all lies. The only real motivation that I needed was that I just wanted to get freedom from this test. I wanted to know that I was good enough for medical school. That's it. That's all I wanted to do. And I had the GPA, it was okay. I had the extracurricular activities, was fine. Personal statement, fantastic. All I wanted to know was that my MCAT score was good enough to get into medical school. That's it. If it was good enough, I could close the door on that part of my life. But it took me 22 months for that honest reflection to come about. And once that came about, I locked myself in my room and I studied for about 460 hours. And and I improved my score that much. And that's the motivation. So this motivation, like it has to come from you. This is the one thing that I cannot provide you guys. I can give you perspective and I can tell you what my motivation was, but you really got to dig deep and ask yourself honestly, why are you even doing this? And in a lot of cases, your motivation will be similar to mine, because you're like, well, I know I'm good enough to get into medical school, but I need an MCAT score to prove it. If I don't have a good MCAT score, it doesn't matter. Everything else doesn't matter. I will never have the option to even go. So anyways, so those are the two biggest things, is to have this process to study and to find your motivation for committing to it. So there you go. You got to keep yourself accountable, and the only way to do that is by having something intrinsically motivating you to get in there and study for 5, 6, 7, 8, even 10 hours a day for weeks. So make sure that I like to talk about that at the beginning and at the end, just to remind you guys of the importance of these two things. So once you find a process, you've got to have the motivation to commit. So now I'm just going to give you a brief recap of the process to study that I used, and that'll give you a nice refresher on what you guys could do day in and day out. This is exactly what I did every day. Okay, so and then yes, of course, feel free to chat in the box, the chat box, and stop me and ask questions. At the end, we're going to make sure that we have a nice Q&A session verbally, so that you can interact with me a bit more. But for now, just kind of pop all your questions into the chat box while I talk. So the process to study that I use is, I call it the boogeyman method, because I always think about the MCAT as I was so afraid of it. I was so paralyzed by fear that it wasn't until I came up with this process through trial, error, and through a lot of people who were much smarter than me, that it started to really elucidate the MCAT as not really a scary thing, but just something that you can practice and learn like any other skill. So the way that I set it up is, a lot of companies used to tell me to make sure that I study content first. Like from day one, you got to study content, you got to review this and review that, and it never worked for me. So I flipped it and I started practicing from day one. I said, you know what? I'm going to let the AAMC practice material guide the content that I need to study. Because I wasn't starting from nowhere. None of us are starting from ground zero. We are all starting with some background knowledge in something. And the quickest and most efficient way I've found to digging out what your flaws and weaknesses are is to dive into the practice. And I'm not saying full-length tests. I'm saying just passages like the question packs or the section banks, or Kaplan or Princeton Review or EK or Next Step, whatever practice material you have. Dive into those passages a few hours a day on day one. Spend a few hours on day one and practice. I mean, if you want to do half an hour of cars, do that. Then time yourself for like a couple hours of psych, and then a couple hours of physical sciences, and a couple hours of bio. That's about 5 to 7 hours of studying that you'll do on day one. Awesome. And then you're going to do them untimed, but I would try to set a timer for like 20 to 30 minutes to make sure that you're not spending like an hour and a half per passage. So definitely spend day one practicing. And then what I would do is day two, or later on in that day one into day two, I would be going over what I just did. I would be going over those passages. And what I do is every time I go over those passages, I have the passage in one side of the screen like this. Like it's like, half the screen is the passage. And the other half of the screen I'm going to pull up right now on my website. There are, under resources, you have MCAT spreadsheet. You can click on that and you guys can all look at it and download it and copy it or whatever. And I would fill up a study bucket. And essentially it would be right here. So physical sciences, it would correspond to this passage. I would put the date analyzed so that I remembered what I've done. The problems and test locations, so it would be like section bank passage 4. And then the questions to add to Quizlet. So over here is where I would just like look at the passage and I would just like start writing rapidly. Like, okay, what does deprotonated serine look like? What does it mean to be conjugated? What is serial dilution? What does a wild type look like? What does this, and this mean? So I would just add them all in this bucket very rapidly. That would allow me to analyze the passage for content, right? I would be able to extract content from the passage by doing this. Very straightforward. Now, how I analyzed it for strategy is I would use right here what I came up with, I think with you guys in the first webinar, is the strategy checklist. So you got to basically ask yourself these 6 questions. This question right here is mostly for cars, but everything else is for every passage, like no matter if it's science or not. So in order to analyze for strategy, you just ask yourself these 6 questions every single passage, and that will give you a very sharp, honest indicator as to whether or not you're BSing yourself or whether or not you're actually following the strategy to a T. Because I'm telling you that most of the mistakes that you make, it's going to be content related, sure, but most of the mistakes you're making is going to be mostly because you forgot to implement some of the strategies. So these 2 things are what I do during the analyze phase, is I extract content and I put it in this bucket, and then I ask myself these 6 questions to make sure that I'm following the strategies to a T. Okay? Then what I do is I organize this stuff from the bucket into Quizlet flashcards. And the reason why I use Quizlet as opposed to Anki or index cards or something else is because of the learn function. And the learn function is just so easy to use, guys. It's so ridiculously easy to use that if you haven't already, please use it, because I mean, you can use Anki if you've already made some decks. Definitely just keep doing that. But in my opinion, Quizlet's so much easier. But either way, let's say, you know, you come on here and you have, you click on the set, you have all your terms here. You know, whatever you do, if you create them, right? If you create, enter definition, right? So what you want to do is, the way I would make flashcards is I look at my bucket. Again, I'll make it split screen. Half of the screen is this, half of the screen is the Quizlet. And then I look at the questions, and every single flashcard gets 1 question, and that's it. 1 question for 1 flashcard. The reason being is because it's much easier to organize it in my head when I just see a flashcard pop up. What organ detoxifies drugs? And then you type in your answer, liver, and you hit enter, and it tells you, oh, correct. And so what I do is essentially that when I'm making these flashcards, I write all the questions down from my study bucket onto here. And then when I'm looking for definitions, guys, this is hugely important. This is a really, really important thing to know. When I'm making definitions to flashcards, it's not copy and paste. Please do not copy and paste definitions if you don't understand something, don't copy and paste it in there. You have to make a flashcard understandable to you. For example, if this question is, what is entropy? I used to make the definition like tendency towards disorder, because we are all familiar with this definition. This is what they teach us in the textbooks. Yet, honestly, guys, I have to be perfectly honest, I don't know what that means. I don't know what that means at all. Tendency towards disorder, it doesn't give me any concrete image. How is my brain supposed to remember it? And again, this is maybe just me, but what I did instead was, first of all, they always give the example of like your bedroom getting messy, and I'm like, have you seen my bedroom? Like, you guys can look at it. It's pretty neat. So I'm like, that doesn't really apply to me. So what is it really talking about? And I would think about electrons. I would think about biochemistry. I would think about just the flow of space. I mean, itself. Everything is expanding. Everything's trying to gain freedom. So I changed it, first of all, to tendency towards freedom. And I gave myself a concrete example. I said it's like when someone tries to grab your wrist and you instinctively pull it away. That is entropy. And when I understood it like that, it completely changed the game for me and thermodynamics. So these are the things that I'm talking about. Like, whenever I'm making definitions, like, yes, I'm going to be watching Khan Academy. I'm going to be Googling this stuff. I'm going to be using my Kaplan book. But when I'm making definitions, guys, it's crucial that I pair what I don't know, which is this, to what I do know, which is this. If I pair what I don't know to what I don't know, that's not learning. And the example that I give people is, imagine a spider trying to make a web. Is a spider going to be making a web on something flimsy like a feather, or something sturdy like a pillar or a corner of a wall? It's going to be making a web on something sturdy. That's exactly what you guys need to be doing when you're making flashcards and definitions. You have to be making this web, this new concept, and latching it onto something that you know, something concrete, something imagery. You know, you got to pair the abstract with the concrete. That's the important thing, guys. So all of this happens during organization phase, which is right here, sorry. So during the organized phase, we're taking a LOL superficial learning. Exactly. That's right. But this is the thing that you guys have to understand. People, and even me, you, I mean, we all make this mistake. We get pressured for time, and so we start to cheat ourselves from the learning process because we think that we have to get into medical school this year. We have to go now, now, now. I can't fall behind. I can't fall behind. What do you mean? If you're sacrificing your education, if you're sacrificing your best performances, if you're not able to learn how to problem solve and think critically and know all these concepts before medical school, it's going to catch up eventually, guys, I'm telling you. And think about it this way. When you're a doctor in 10 years, I'm going to ask you, hey, have you been practicing for 9 years or 10 years? You'd be like, what? I don't even care. I stopped counting after residency. And that's my point. Right now, guys, you might be thinking like, oh, my God, I'm behind. No, you're not. You go in at your own pace. That's the most important thing. So, I mean, even though, yes, we might laugh at superficial learning, we'll have to understand that we all make this mistake. And it's our job to keep ourselves aware and honest that we don't make mistakes in this way. Otherwise, I'm telling you, it's going to come back at you. It's going to come back in some way. I mean, the MCAT's going to reflect it in the form of a score. And let's say you get like a good enough MCAT, like maybe 506, barely passing over that hump of the Gaussian distribution, then okay, but it'll catch up sometime in medical school because the habits are not there. You haven't formed the good habits of studying and learning. So anyways, guys, so that's organization, making one question. So you take the question from here, you put it onto flashcards, and then when you're looking for definitions, please just make sure that it makes sense to you. That's it. And so that's basically the organization phase, and that's the third phase of the 4. Then you go on to drilling. And just before you go on to drilling, guys, this is another important thing to know. That imagine that you have been doing this boogeyman method, this cycle over and over and over again. You're pulling like hundreds and hundreds of terms from like a one full-length test, gives you like 100 different concepts and questions, and then you have passage after passage. Like you might get a deck that's over thousands of flashcards. That is really, 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 really difficult to drill over and over and over again. So my advice to you, and this is what I did, was every single time that I would finish organizing my flashcards, and just before moving on to phase 4, which is to drill them, every single time I would do that, I would make sure that I deleted. I would go through, and you can see this trash can little thing right here. I would go through and I would delete the flashcards that I felt confident with. That if in my previous, somebody's joining, hold on. I would delete the flashcards that made sense to me. That if I look at my previous data, it'll show you, can't hear you. Your voice got cut off. Uh-oh. Can people type in the chat box? Can you all hear me? Okay. So it looks, Michael, just make sure. Okay. Michael, make sure that you dial into that number. Again, you can always exit and come right back. And don't worry, because this is being recorded, so you will at least be able to come back to the parts that cut off for you, okay? So definitely hang up and call again. You have the number up here in the chat box. I will, oh my goodness. What is this? Yeah. What? Sorry. Let me copy and paste this for you right now, Michael, and then you can call again. There you go. Okay, great. So yes, so what I do is I go through, and based upon the data, you'll be able to see, which terms you've gotten right on the first round, second round, third round, and so I base my decisions on basically which ones I got on the first try. So when you're taking Quizlet, when you're doing Quizlet decks, you'll be able to see. Basically, let's look at this real quick. So like if I click on this, This is a bigger deck. You'll be able to hit the learn function as soon as it loads. You'll be able to hit the learn function of Quizlet, and what this does is it asks you simple questions. What is entropy? You type in your answer, and then you go through all the flashcards, and it shows you round 1, you got 65%. Okay, so then for me, whatever I got in round 1, I will delete. But the thing is that you might be saying, well, oh my gosh, you can delete all those things? Well, not necessarily, because it's all going to be saved here. So the question, what is entropy, is going to be here, and so you'll be able to control F, and then type in entropy, and it'll pop up, the relevant test location and the date that you analyzed it, so you can go back, and you can always review the question that talked about entropy and study that. But while you're studying, guys, you have to make sure that you're deleting some flashcards along the way. This takes trust, but don't trust yourself. Trust the data. You answered this question correctly in the first round, so delete it. That means that you know it, at least for now. And the reason being is because there will be a lot of terms that will catch up to you, and you will get swamped, and you'll start to study less efficiently. And what I mean by that is you're going to waste time studying things that you know better than things that you don't. And that's what I'm saying. So just before you drill, and just after you've made your flashcards from the practice passages that you did, delete some flashcards so that you're not overwhelmed and that your flashcard deck doesn't get over 1,000 cards. It remains like maybe a couple hundred or 400 or 300 or 100, whatever it is. It's basically like housekeeping. So clean it up, and then you drill it. And for drilling it, again, pretty straightforward. You just hit the learn function. So I just want to show you briefly what that looks like. Yes, right here. There we go. So you have your, 500 psychology, sociology terms. Fantastic. You go to learn, right? You hit learn, and then there you go. Randomized control trial is this. Answer. There you go. It's going to pop you into that bucket, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and you keep going. And so it's really cool because you can always edit it. Like if you made the right answer, but this one is like not exactly the same, you can override it, or you can go ahead and edit it and change it up. Then you just press any key to continue. Selective attention, broadband, early selection theory, same thing. You hit answer, and you keep going like that. So this is how I drill it, and this might take me a day to do. So let me recap it again. Day 1, couple hours, or maybe 5-6 hours practice. And then day 2, you're going to analyze and organize. So you're going to, you're going to extract the content and put it into your study bucket, the spreadsheet, and you're going to ask yourself these 6 questions for every passage, and then you're going to organize whatever you've extracted into flashcards, and you're going to delete the other flashcards. That will take you a day to do those 2 things, organize yourself and analyze, and then you'll start drilling on day 3, and you go round and round and round. It might take you 1 day to do this whole thing in a cycle. It might take you 2, 3, a week. On average, it takes about 3 days. So you practice as much as you can, analyze, organize in 1 day, start drilling in the next day, and then get right back on it. So you just keep doing that over and over and over again. This is a very scalable process, meaning that if you did 10 practice passages, it will still work, just like if you did a full-length test, which has many, many passages on it. It's scalable. The only difference is that it's going to take you a bit more time to go through this cycle, depending upon how much practice you do. So that's it, guys. Really important that you make sure that you know that, so that when you're by yourself studying, you know exactly what to do. And that's exactly what I did. So, okay. That being said, any major questions on that, we can always talk about at the end. So definitely write down your questions, and then we'll get to them. But for now, let's jump into was this a physical science passage? Yeah, this one looks pretty scary, I think. So, okay. Let's zoom in here real quick. Okay. So, the strategy that I use for all of the science passages is what I do is I only read the first paragraph. I'll only read this. I won't read the rest of the passage because I've found that the only section of the MCAT that you need to understand the full passage is cars. And even then, you can kind of get away with some stuff. But basically, there's no real main argument of these scientific passages. And as a result, I'm not going to waste my time reading the whole passage and trying to getting everything in my head because there's too many things. So I read the first paragraph, and then I come to the first question, and I do my best to see if I can answer it. If I can, sweet, that's awesome. Let me try the second question. Oh my gosh, I can answer that too? Awesome. Let's go to the third question. And you'll find that sometimes you won't even have to read the whole passage in order to answer all the questions, which is great. So let's say that you reach a roadblock. So, you read the first paragraph, you answer this question. Awesome. You answer this question. Awesome. You cannot answer this question. Okay, then what I do is, before I rush back to the passage, I make sure that I actually read what this question is asking. Why? Because there's something in psychology called priming, right? Basically getting your brain ready for something. So, for example, if I were to, if I were to know what question this is asking, like what do they want me to know about the third paragraph or about the second paragraph or about the first figure, I'm going to be able to find the answer. It's going to pop out to me more easily than if I was going in blind. So that's the reason why I make sure that, okay, I did my best. I hit this roadblock right here. Let me at least get familiarized with what the question's asking, because I'm going to have to read the question anyway. So let me read it right now, understand, okay, they're asking me to look and make sure that I look at the substitutions on each variant. Okay. So then I come back and I look at the substitutions right here. Awesome. Okay, gotcha. And then it'll pop out to me much more easily. So that's basically the strategy. One paragraph and then try to answer as many as you can, then go back up. So for all of the passages, what I do is I make sure that I read the title first. This gives my brain some context. And what I imagine is that, there's a lot of passages on the MCAT. And so as a result, there's a lot of difficulty in maintaining stamina and maintaining focus, passage after passage after passage. It's something that I've found for myself that it was difficult to maintain focus as I went through the 7-hour exam. So what I do is I make sure that I read the title every single time, doesn't matter what section it is, and I try to get some context. So over here, we read the title. It's by Miss Johnson, and the title is A Sensitive and Robust Enzyme Kinetic Experiment Using Microplates and Fluorogenic Ester Substrates. Fantastic. So I know that it's going to be about enzyme kinetics. Even though this is a physical science passage, it's going to be about enzyme kinetics. So that's important. So now what I do is I scroll back up, and I close my eyes, and I spend literally 2 seconds taking a deep breath. And when I do that, in my mind, what I'm thinking about is I'm imagining that in my brain there's a file cabinet, and I'm basically pulling out the file that talks about enzyme kinetics, and everything else is gone. I'm not worried about the previous passages. I'm not worried about the future passages. I'm only focused on enzyme kinetics because that's what this passage is going to be about. And when I do that, it greatly improved my stamina, I'm telling you guys. So it's a nice little trick. Just give yourself 2 seconds, take a deep breath, close your eyes, and focus yourself on pulling that enzyme kinetics file out of your file cabinet in your brain. Okay, so then we take a deep breath, good to go, and then we just kind of launch into the first paragraph. And so I'm going to give you guys and the guys who are watching the recording about 20, 30 seconds to kind of read this by yourself, and then we'll continue down. I'll read it silently in my head as well. This way it's more engaging and hands-on. So good luck, everybody. I'll give you about 20, 30 seconds to read through this paragraph. Okay. So we all read the first paragraph. So we're going to come down here. And we're going to try to answer the first question. The first question says, which of the two products was detected during the experiment? Aha! Perfect. So we can definitely answer this question, right? Because it talks of exactly about that. Like when I was reading this passage, it says one of the products was intensely colored. And so me being curious and me trying to read with intent, I'm asking myself, wait a minute, which one is intensely colored? And then they give us this reaction. They show us the compounds. And essentially, I'm not going to go dive too much in detail about it, but basically, you'll know that conjugation provides the intense coloration, right? The compound that has the most conjugation, which is compound 2B, will allow for the most intensely colored product. And the reason for that is because of basically the electrons kind of floating nicely, around like that, right? There's a lot of delocalization, a lot of conjugation. So definitely, if you don't know, conjugation leads to intensely colored products. That will be something that when we analyze it in phase 2, we will add that to our study bucket. It will be, why does conjugation produce color? There we go. But if you did know that, awesome. If you didn't know that, well, here you go. So which of the two products was detected? So what I do is I always make sure that I answer it myself first. I don't even care about the answer choices. I pretend that this whole exam is not a multiple choice exam, and I just try and see, okay, what is the answer that I know? I know that it's going to be compound 2B because of conjugation. So I'm going to say basically 2B in my mind. I have 2B because of conjugation, right? So that's essentially my answer. Now, all I have to do, and this is something that a monkey can do, right, which is a bit crude to say, but still, is you just got to pick the right answer that corresponds to the answer that you gave. So which one of these things sounds the most like? And it would be C. Yeah? And this is something that I do for every single question, whether it's as straightforward as this or as nebulous and abstract as a CARS passage. I always attempt to answer the question first. Always, 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 always. There's no going around it. Answer it, and this could just be bullet points. Okay, well, I know this about this question, this about this question. Great. This is the hardest part. Once you've gotten through this, you've now armed yourself with choosing the correct answer, whichever one corresponds the most to this. And over here, it's not going to be compound 2A, not this, and it's not this because those are not phenols and quinones. And if you don't know what that is, again, you will, when you go back and analyze the passage in phase 2, you're going to quickly drop these into your bucket. What does a phenol look like? What does a quinone look like? Done. So anyways, it's C. So now instead of going back up and rereading, let's continue. Let's try to answer number 2. Okay, awesome. What is the value of Km in micromolar for the wild type enzyme? Okay, well, I understand this constant, but I've never read anything about that so far. All I've read is about the compounds 2A and 2B. So basically, I have to go back up and read the passage until I find this answer, which is a very straightforward question. So we're basically looking for the Km. It's going to be one of these values. So let's go back up and try it. So we read until there, so let's go ahead and read until right here. So we'll go ahead and read from here to here. Give you about a few 30 seconds or so. Try to find the answer. Remember, we're looking for what Km is, guys. We're looking for what Km is. Okay. So, if you haven't finished it, don't worry. Basically, we're looking for KM. There's a few ways to find it. It wasn't really in this paragraph here, but this paragraph was still interesting nonetheless. I don't really worry myself with memorizing the numbers here because it's pointless. I don't really care. Like every time I'm reading it, I'm like, the experiment was initiated by adding blah of protein solution, which included blah of BSA. BSA contains up to blah of the mass. Like every time there's a number, I replace it with blah because I'm like, I'm not even going to try. Like there's no point. So, yeah, so I just kind of like got it. Basically, you know, they had the serial dilution. They used BSA. They had, you know, a wild type and 4 variants. They measured everything spectroscopically because, again, this thing can produce intensely colored light. And they give us the this figure right here, which says the initial velocity versus substrate concentration, which, if you guys know this, awesome. This is basically Michaelis-Menten. This equation right here is, yeah, again, Michaelis-Menten equation. So essentially it's going to be, if you don't know what this equation looks like, but it's basically Vmax times concentration of substrate over Km plus concentration of substrate. So that's your boy's equation for V naught. And so, like, if you knew that equation, then the answer is very, very obviously 1.31. If you didn't know that equation, here's another way to figure it out. Vmax, you know, so we have to understand, first of all, what is Km? Km is the concentration of substrate. Okay, it's the concentration of substrate at 1/2 Vmax. Okay, that's it. So when we're looking at this graph, we got to find Vmax. It's this asymptote right here, and that's about 1.6, I would say, yeah? So we take 1.6 and we divide it by 2. What's 1/2 of 1.6? 0.8. So we go here, 0.8, and then remember, this we're looking for the concentration of the substrate, which is the x-axis right here. So we take 0.8, we trace our fingers, we come straight down, and we get it's about 1. It's like just a little bit over 1. It's like 1.2-ish. So no matter which way you approach it, you have to know what Km is, or you have to know what this equation is. Otherwise, you will not be able to find the answer. And the answer is, as we see, B. Okay? Fantastic. Let's keep going. In each variant, the substitution that took place changed the side chain at the affected position in which way? Oh my gosh. So what is this basically asking? First of all, what is the substitution that took place? What is it? What is the substitution? That's the first question. And then, how is it different than the original thing? Right? Cool. So we don't know what the substitution was, so let's go back up and read it. Oh, we got another person who's joining. Okay, let me quickly tell her. Please make sure to dial in. Okay. Yes, so we have to know 2 things. We have to go back up. What are we reading for? We're going to be reading for, we have to locate the substitution that took place, and we have to ask ourselves, how does this substitution affect the original side chain? Awesome, let's go. So we come back up here, and we're almost done with the passage. We just got to read from here to here. Perfect. So it says, yeah, so I'll just basically read this out loud with you guys because it's very straightforward. Data for all 5 esterases tested are collected in this table. Here you go, and here's the table. Okay, guys, so let me ask you a question. Anybody can type in what is the substitution that took place for all 4 variants? What is the substitution that took place? Anybody tell me? Yes, alanine, exactly. So very good. So if you guys don't know, replace it with alanine. Exactly, perfect. So if you guys don't know what that looks like, this is basically saying valine at position 86 was substituted with an alanine. Methionine at position 87 was substituted with alanine. Leucine at this position was substituted with alanine. Isoleucine at this position was substituted with alanine. So remember, this is like let's say this is like a protein. Every single point has like a number to it. Okay, this is like position. Let's say this is position like 86 over here. Okay, this little valine was substituted for an alanine. Okay, and then position 87, then position 209, and then 276. So that's basically what it's talking about. Okay. Excelente. So we know that the substitution was alanine. So the next question is, how does that substitution affect the original guys? So we got basically V, M, L, I versus A. What's the difference? First of all, they are all polar or nonpolar. Anybody can type in. Nonpolar. Is alanine polar or nonpolar? Nonpolar, exactly. So that's not a change. They didn't affect the polarity. Are any of these things charged? Anything, acidic or basic? Anything here charged? No. So that basically gets rid of all the charge changes. So what's the only difference between alanine and the rest of these guys? It's not polarity, it's not charge. What's the only difference between these guys? Starts with an S. Nope, not side chain. Well, what do you mean by side chain? Because steric hindrance? Essentially, it's a four-letter word. Yes, steric is nice, but I prefer size. Exactly. Good job. Good job. So size is basically the only difference. And so, Walter, you got it right. It is decreased sterics. So that's it. Very straightforward. Like, forget hydrophobicity. No, they're both nonpolar, and none of them are charged. So it's D. Fantastic. Okay. Yay! Haha. You got it. Okay. So now, just as a tangent, guys, I need you to know this like the back of your hand. Draw me alanine. Okay, I'm going to do this for you because I can't see your paper. But basically, yes, you got this. This is how I draw every amino acid, very loosely. But hooray, we did it! There's alanine. Okay, so alanine makes up every single amino acid except for which amino acid. Alanine is the backbone. We call it the alanine backbone. This backbone makes up every single amino acid structure except which amino acid? Can anybody tell me? Proline? Nope. Even proline starts with the alanine backbone. Glycine. Great job. Absolutely. Yes, it's glycine. Glycine is the only thing that has, instead of a CH methyl group, it has just a hydrogen. So it has a hydrogen here, hydrogen here. The hydrogen here is implied. This hydrogen is implied for every structure. But yes, basically, the alanine makes up the backbone for every single amino acid. So every single time I have to ask you, every single time you want to draw out any amino acid, guys, immediately start with alanine and then see what you have to do from there. So for example, with valine, there's a trick that you can look up on YouTube. It's called like it's like, I think the, let me type it in right here into the chat, 1 second. There's a YouTube channel called Draw It Know. So like right here, so Draw It Know. So definitely Google that on, or like look it up on YouTube and then just look up amino acids. Like it's like how to learn amino acids in 20 minutes or something like that. And they give you like really cool mnemonics to know on how the structures work. So you start with alanine, and with valine, literally valine is a V, right? So you put a V right here, and that's valine. It's pretty cool. So and then isoleucine, you put like an I. Leucine is like an L. It's really cool. Like methionine is also like you put an M, but then like you make like an S for the sulfur. But either way, like definitely check out Draw It Know, and you'll be able to learn how to do all those structures and everything so that it makes sense to you. But basically, yes, alanine is nonpolar, not charged, and but it's small, it's tiny. It's the backbone for every amino acid except for glycine. Okay, so it's a bit of a tangent. Sorry about that. Now, let's keep going, guys. Okay, so we've basically, at this point, we've finally finished the whole passage, but guess what? we've already answered 1, 2, 3 questions. We're halfway there, and we've already finished the passage, so that's fantastic. So we got question number 4 says, what was the most likely purpose? Guys, this is a question stem that basically is the AAMC's way of telling you, hey guys, the answer is in the passage. That's it. Whenever you see most likely, literally, they're telling you, please refer to the part of the passage that's talking about this. Okay, so let's do that. And over here it says, BSA constitutes up to 50% of the mass of protein found in blood and mobilizes proteins and lipids. Excellent. Okay, great. Fantastic. So we come in here, and remember how I say that I always answer the question before I look at the answer choices? So my bullet point list here will be 50% of the mass found in blood serum of protein, and then mobilizes proteins and lipids. That's my Bible now, guys. I will not sway from this. This is the answer. I know it. Why? Because it's from the passage directly. That's it. It's the only information we get from it. So now, again, all I have to do is pick, and this is where, basically vocabulary, knowing English is going to help you. The more fluent you are with English, the better you're going to be with understanding the answer choices, because they might not tell you explicitly it constitutes 50% of the mass, or it mobilizes proteins and lipids, but they're going to say them in slightly different ways, okay? So let's try and see. Acts as a co-catalyst, doesn't really say that, but let's see. This is where the strategy of bracketing comes in. Now, I know that most of you know what bracketing is, but basically it's a process of elimination, but on steroids. So instead of just saying, oh, this sounds weak, oh, that sounds weak, that sounds weak, that sounds weak, and then you're like, oh, wait a minute, I crossed off all 4 answers. Now I have to go and uncross an answer and then try and do that, which I used to do all the time. Take a step back, hold on, before you cross off A, let's compare it to B. Just like March Madness, guys. Like if it's like UNC Chapel Hill versus Duke college basketball, UNC Chapel Hill is my alma mater, and so I'm happy that we won last March Madness. So let's say it's UNC versus Duke. So instead of just saying, oh, UNC is weak or Duke is weak, well, that doesn't really tell us anything. Let's try and pair them against each other. So A versus B, which one is stronger? Which one is stronger? And how do I know what's stronger? I look at E. I look at this stuff right here. And I also use what is called MSLR, which is most support, least rationalization. So whichever one has the most support, meaning that whichever one sounds more like this, and whichever one requires you to rationalize the least. So whichever one's like so convoluted, you're like, oh, well, maybe this, maybe that, maybe this. No, that's not a very strong answer. So that's what we used. We use this, and we use basically, this answer right here, answer choice E, to determine the strength of each answer choice. So A says it acts as a co-catalyst for the reaction. Guys, that does not talk about constituting 50% of the mass. It does not talk about mobilizing proteins or lipids. So there's no support. But let's see what B says. Prevents the esterase from adhering to the walls of the vessel. So what does that mean? If you prevent something from adhering, that means that you're mobilizing it, correct? Okay, so is an esterase a protein or lipid? Is that anything? Like, is it a protein or lipid? Yes, it's a protein, yeah? So this is much stronger than A, so we're going to cross off A now. Let's compare B to C. Which one's stronger? Helps buffer the solution from changes in pH. Okay. Does that talk about any of these things? I mean, it's a clever answer. It might trip you guys up, but remember, it's going to cause you to rationalize. You're going to have to go back up to the passage and say, well, it says this and this and this. No. This is your Bible, okay? You've already understood. You've already done the hard part. So which one has more support and least rationalization? B. So C is gone, okay? And then B versus D. Is a non-specific target for protease contaminants. This is what's going to trip up students. They're going to think to themselves, oh my gosh, protease contaminants. That sounds so high level. That sounds like an answer that the AMC wants me to pick. I'm going to choose it. Why? You're rationalizing and there's no support, so don't pick it. So the answer is B. So that's it. And here's why I'm so confident. Because the AAMC is a standardized test, guys. They're not supposed to make an answer so ambiguous. They have to make answers that are standardized and that somebody who has good critical thinking skills can just simply point to the passage and say, I got this from there. And you're like, yep, there you go. Most support, least rationalization, B is the strongest answer of the 4 candidates here, like a tournament again. So there you go. Okay, so B is the answer there. It prevents the esterase, which is a protein, from adhering to the walls of the vessel, which basically says mobilization. So this is basically saying mobilizes proteins and lipids, essentially. So which variant showed the lowest catalytic efficiency? Okay, so first of all, question for you guys. Does anybody know what the equation for catalytic efficiency is? It's an equation. Perfect. Kcat over Km, exactly. Very good. So when it comes down to it, let's say you didn't know what Kcat over Km, or you didn't know that that was the equation. Okay. What we got to do is we got to go back up to the table, and we see that we have, fortunately, Kcat and Km. So it's not a coincidence that we have those two things. But let's say we didn't know what catalytic efficiency was, but we did know what Kcat and Km are. So can anybody tell me, well, wait, forget that. I mean, we already have it right here. The units, yeah. So Kcat is 1 over seconds. So what does that mean? So it means that if there's a lot of seconds, meaning that it's a lot of time, is this fraction going to get smaller or bigger? It's going to get smaller. The more time it takes, the smaller the Kcat. So if it takes a lot of time to do something, is that very efficient? We can always intuit, no. Efficiency usually correlates to being a faster time. So we know that the smaller, we know that the smaller the Kcat, the less efficient. So over here we have Kcat. Is it increasing or decreasing, guys? If the exponent is getting more negative, that means that it's decreasing in its value. So the trend over here in this chart is that actually the numbers it's getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So basically, we know that the trend is that this is the least efficient one. But let's compare that to Km. Okay, guys, we already know what Km is. We know that it's the substrate required, the concentration of substrate required to get the reaction to 1/2 Vmax. So if you need more stuff to get the reaction to go, it's going to be more efficient or less efficient? Less. If you had, again, efficiency, right? It's all about speed and using only a little bit of resources. So if you need a lot of stuff to get this thing going at a speed that's comparable to only that much stuff, well, that's not very efficient. So we can very much intuit that this is the least efficient thing. Okay? But if you knew the equation, Kcat over Km, yeah, then you can just do this over that, this over that, this over that. But even then, it's actually easier, I feel like, to do it this way, to be honest with you guys. You just see the trends. Okay, Kcat's getting smaller, so that's less efficient. Km's getting bigger over here, so it's less efficient. So this is the less efficient one. Fantastic. So there you go. Last question here, guys. What mass of NaCl? So we're looking for grams. They gave us the grams per mole. Awesome. So we have grams per mole. Was present in this microliters of the PBS solution. So remember, back up here, we had NaCl somewhere in the passage. It gave us the concentration here. Fantastic. So we have the molarity, we have the liters. What does that scream to you guys? Molarity, the equation, moles per liter. Moles per liter. Quick side note, make sure that they give it to you in microliters. It must be in liters, so you have to do a conversion. It will be, so 100 microliters is going to be 10 to the 4th liters. And then they give you, it was like, what was it, like 0.1 micromolar? 0.1 micromolar of NaCl, so we have 0.1 micromolar over here. So 0.1 micromolars is going to also be 10 to the 4th molars. 10 to the negative 4th molars. So we're looking for moles. Why? Because we want to multiply moles up top here so that we can get the grams. Correct? Okay, awesome. So we have x moles here. 10 to the negative 4th times 10 to the negative 4th. 10 to the negative 8th. Okay, great. And so 10 to the negative 8th is our moles. Then basically multiplied by this, we have 58.5 times 10 to the negative 8 moles. Or sorry, grams, right? That's the answer. So we just go answer by answer and try and do the conversions, and then we'll find that 585 nanograms is the same thing as 5.85 times 10 to the negative, whatever, grams. So that's the answer. It's very, very, if you don't know this equation, again, when we analyze it now, we'll go back through it and we'll analyze it, and we're going to pull apart How do you solve for grams when given grams per mole, molar, and liters? And then you'll be able to make a flashcard based upon that. So hopefully that was a nice broad overview. Very straightforward. I mean, there's a few strategies that we used, but let's go ahead and analyze it, okay? So let's split this half screen. Let me zoom out. So imagine that you guys are doing this by yourself, right? You guys have just completed this one passage by yourself, and you've done like 10 other passages. It took you like, 3-4 hours to do, and you're pretty much like, I'm done practicing for this cycle of the method. I want to start analyzing it, and I want to start practicing and drilling different things. So what you're going to do is you're going to move on from phase 1, which is practice. You've just completed that, to phase 2, which is analyze. So we're going to do that right now together, real quick. So you're going to come through these passages, and you're going to, where's the passage from? Everything is from the AAMC section bank. So I think this one is like, I don't know which one it is. AAMC section bank passage something. I can't remember. Passage 4 maybe? Passage 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm not sure. And it's okay if you guys have seen this before, because it's about the process of studying and the approach to answering the questions. It's really, really important that you understand. So now we've done our best. We've done our best. Now I don't care if you got a question right or wrong. You can learn something from everything. So you got to wring the potential dry from these passages. These passages are gold. They will guide your studying. So please, give them the respect they deserve. So real quick, I think I'm going to minimize this. Yeah, okay. Let's just do that. Put it over here. Okay. So analyze. Basically, let's do the strategy checklist first. Actually, it'll be more fun to do this real quick to show you an example. So let's open up the spreadsheet. And when we're coming onto this this passage, we're going to say, 1 second, it's still loading. Okay. Look, a little dark. Oh. Okay. Anyways, give it about 10 seconds. There we go. Great. So we'll come in here. It says date analyzed. We're going to say 8/6/17. Awesome. Problems test location. We'll say this is physical sciences, obviously already. So section bank, passage. Let's say like it's 4. And then we'll just get to work. Let's go. So we're going to read from the top, and we're going to try and extract everything that we can study that we didn't really understand. And the thing that I'm using to guide my analysis and to understand, how do I know what to study and what not to study? Only study what would have helped you understand the passage and get the questions right. Okay? So for example, I ain't going to study the structure right here, guys. I'm not going to study the structure. Why? Because it was completely irrelevant. What was relevant? Conjugation. So I'm going to go ahead and write that down. Basically, how do you know if a compound is intensely colored? Or you can even say, how does conjugation produce intensely colored light? We can say, you can be as specific or as broad as you want, guys. So that's basically it. You go through, you're just basically talking about, how, what is the Michaelis-Menten equation? Okay. What is Km? What is V max? What is catalytic efficiency? What is, what does V86A mean? You know what I mean? Whatever was there, you tripped up. What's a phenol look like? Quinone. what does phenol look like, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you guys get the point. So basically, you're going to go through this, over here, what's basically you put, yeah. So you guys get the point. So basically, you come in through and you're going to be doing this. You're going to click on the cell, click on more, go to text wrapping, hit wrap text, and then boom, you got your nice filled study bucket from, and you can make this like whatever all your dates are, and then all this stuff, same thing, and then you go through and you fill it up. So it's a really nice way to organize yourself very quickly. So done. We've just analyzed it for content. Doesn't take that much time, guys. So don't spend like, what is this? I know that a lot of people waste a lot of time looking through solutions. Forget it. Forget it. Forget it. You know what tripped you up. You know what you don't know. Write it down into flashcards and move on. So it's about speed and efficiency, guys. So we've extracted all this content. Fantastic. Now, before we move on to flashcards, let's make sure that we do the checklist for strategy to make sure that we are being honest with ourselves about how we're actually doing this. So we go back and we say, did I read with emotion? So when I'm reading this, was I reading it like, okay, students, or was I saying, in my mind, was I saying students developed a procedure to measure the kinetic parameters for several. The reason why I say read with emotion is for a few reasons. One, it's less boring. So you're going to remember it more. It's going to be more stamina for you guys. Number two, these were written by real people. So Miss Johnson over here was really passionate when she produced this stuff. So try to give it the respect that it deserves and read it with some passion. This is going to help us a lot with cars as well. So read it with emotion. Make sure that you're actually engaged. And the second reason is because if you kind of are reading with more emotion, if you're invested more into the passage, you're going to care more. And when you care more about something, guess what? You remember things more. Things stand out to you more. So when I'm reading NaCl and I'm looking at this question at the end here, and the question says NaCl, well then I remember exactly where to go to. Or when it asks about BSA, I know exactly where to go to because I was invested in it. I remember when she was saying BSA. So yeah, did I read with emotion? Yeah. If you guys didn't, then okay, remember to do it next time. Did I circle, highlight the shifts in tone? This is for cars only, so we'll skip it. Did I pay attention to the question stem? Yes, we did. So for example, question stems that are important, for example, most likely is a great question stem to know. Most likely, according to the author in the passage, according to the experiment, according to figure 2, all these different question stems are very important because they basically all tell you, hey, the answer is found in this part of the passage. So we did that. Awesome. Did I use bracketing? Yes, we did. We did it here where it was necessary. So we did it. When determining the strongest answer, did I use MSLR? Yes, we did. Did I come up with answer choice E? Yes, we did. We actually did it for every single question. Answer choice E we did for every single question. So fantastic. Looks like we did a pretty good job, and as a result, we did well in this passage. So we've extracted the content. We have understood our strategy. So that's the analyze portion. Now from here, we've gotten our bucket filled out. We're going to take all these different questions and we're going to straight up, copy and paste them into flashcards, which you guys can do on your own time. Put them into flashcards, and then make sure that we delete the other flashcards that we know like the back of our hands. And how do we know that? We just look at, we click on Learn, and it will show us our previous rounds that we've done. And so whatever things that we've gotten right in the first round, in my opinion, you should delete. But be your own judge. If you're nervous about deleting something, then leave it. Okay, it's fine. It's just, again, about making sure that you're efficient with your studying, that you're only focusing on what you need to be focusing on. So, yeah, so, that's what we're basically doing is we're going to be making those flashcards and then deleting some of the flashcards. Then we drill them. We hit the learn function. We get to work. Round 1, round 2, round 3, until we hit 100%, which it will track automatically for you, and then back to practicing the next day. Okay, great. So that's that. Any questions on this passage before we move on to another passage? Any questions on anything that that I talked about? I know I threw a lot at you. Anything? If you want me to unmute you, just let me know and I can unmute you and you can talk to me in person. It's pretty straightforward then, huh? I recognize that I talk fast and I try to get through a lot, but you have to understand that I'm doing this in about 2 hours or so, and I also record them. So if you missed something, you can always go to the relevant part of the recording when I send it to you after we're done. But if you have any questions, please type it in, and and otherwise we'll move on. I know Walter had suggested a cars passage, so we'll do one of those. While you guys think of questions, I'll find a passage. Let's see. What's this one about? Oh shoot, this one. This one's crazy. Formalist critic. Yeah, let's do it. Wow, it's a lot of questions here. Oh, what formulas do you find essential to memorize? Was the question. What formulas do you find essential to memorize? I have completely eliminated the question of what do I need to study, specifically because of studying only what I practice. So if I come across, I think there's a couple passages like if I come across like the focal length equation, 1 over this, 1 over O, 1 over I, 1 over D, all that, or 1 over F. If that would have helped me answer the question, then I'm definitely going to put that into a flashcard and memorize it. But what I will say though is I'm not going to tell you that there's no such thing as high yield. There absolutely is. And so here's a little thought experiment for you, Anushka, because that's a good question. Let me ask you a question. So when you think about it, the AAMC, they are writing this test in order to give a good indicator to medical schools of the readiness of students for med school. Now, can you think about so naturally some topics are going to be present more than other topics. Can you think about some topics that are more present than others? Yeah, naturally you're going to have biochemistry, you're going to have, obviously Michaelis-Menten equations, you're going to have, other equations are going to be like optics, fluids, electrochemistry, resistance, these different things. The things that, and I kind of mapped them out here in terms of what I found was high yield through a lot of just practice and a lot of studying with other people and through using this thought experiment. Yeah, you can pretty much imagine that these are basically going to be your big ones. And so whatever equations go along with those would probably be a safe bet to memorize. So I would start here, and I would remember that that's the concept, that's the principle behind why things are high yield. Because this term is thrown around left and right, but the reason why there's anything even high yield is because human beings are writing the test, and they have objectives, and the objective is to make sure that you're ready for med school. And med school is a ton about biochemistry and stuff like that. That's why you're seeing the shift in terms of biochemistry being very, very, very prevalent, as well as behavioral sciences. And so the physics equations that are going to go along with it are most likely, again, this is not objective, this is subjective, and this is based upon conjecture and experiential data, but it is intuitive. So if you want to take a screenshot, or if you want me to basically send you guys this stuff later on, I can always do that. Right now I'm working on a massive blog post that basically outlines everything that you need to know for the MCAT, including resources and how to make PowerPoints and how to do all this stuff. And like what learning is, and there's the high yield stuff right here. So I'm working on all this stuff. It's almost done, but basically if you want the high yield topics, just shoot me a message, email. You guys should all have my contact information, but you'll have this stuff soon. How to make a schedule, all that stuff. Anyways, let me get back to where I was at before. No. But good question. So send me an email if you want that high yield thing, but you can do it yourself and think about, yeah, that makes sense. They're trying to get me ready for med school, so what is most relevant to the human body? What is most relevant to med school and medicine? Okay, it'd be this, this, and this. So then you'll start to realize, okay, then I should probably know this equation more than that equation. So yeah. Torque is also a big one. Torque, because like you'll have like, lifting exercises, or like resistance training is like a big topic. So these kind of like medicinal type topics. So that's my answer to that. Good question. Okay, so with CARS again, guys, CARS is essentially the only thing that's different about it than the other stuff. The other stuff is there's two things. One, read the whole passage before answering the questions. Some people disagree with this. I don't. The reason why is because you have to at least read enough to get the argument of the author. How do you find the argument of the author? You have to identify the shift in tone. What is a shift in tone? I mean, guys, how easy is it for you to understand me versus if I were to transcribe every single thing that I just spoke about in the last hour and 20 minutes? You know how awful that would be to read? But it flows much nicer because you get to hear my tone of voice. That's why, that's why I keep burping, I'm so sorry. That's why it's really important to be able to hear the audio and stuff like that. So what you got to do is you got to reverse engineer that. You got to say, okay, if the only difference between this text argument and my argument is just a tone of voice, well then I'm going to make sure that I dig out the tone of voice. I'm going to try and make sure that I dig out the shifts in tone. So for example, if my argument was that, weightlifting is great, it gets you bigger and it increases your strength and it helps you build more muscle, right? What's the next word I'm going to say? But it also makes you more prone to injury, makes you more rigid, blah, 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 blah. So you can understand my argument because you can predict my argument because you've identified the shift in tone. And the shift in tone comes from the word but, or yet, or however, or on the other hand, or whatever, right? So when you are reading, the only thing you got to do is read it with emotion. Have some energy when you're reading it. Don't just read it monotonously, because then the word monotone is exactly the opposite of what you want. You want to find the tones. You want to be able to predict and basically pretend that you're an actor or actress and that this author is your role and your script is this passage. How would you read it? You wouldn't read it like blah, 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 blah. You'd read it with some emotion. So definitely want to make sure you do that. And so let's go ahead and jump into it. I will read it out loud for you guys. That way there's not such a large amount of silence on this recording. So again, the strategy is to read the whole passage and then go to the questions and try to answer the questions. So let's do it. First of all, title says The Formalist Critic. So it's going to be something about formal, something literary. I see the word literary here. So something about literature and formality and criticism. Okay, I'm going to close my eyes. Take a deep breath. Think about formality, literature, and all that stuff. Okay, here we go. In the first place, to make the poem or the novel the central concern of literary criticism has appeared to mean cutting it loose from its author and from the author's particular hopes, fears, interests, conflicts, etc. A criticism so limited may seem bloodless and hollow. In the second place, to emphasize the work seems to involve severing it from those who actually read it. And this severance may seem drastic and therefore disastrous. After all, literature is written to be read. The formalist critic knows as well as anyone that poems and plays and novels are written as expressions of particular personalities and are written from all sorts of motives, for money, from a desire to express oneself, for the sake of a cause, etc. Moreover, the formalist critic knows as well as anyone that literary works are merely potential until they are read. That is, that they are recreated in the minds of actual readers who vary enormously in their capabilities, their interests, their prejudices, their ideas. But, oh yeah, here we go. We found the shift in tone. The formalist critic is concerned primarily with the work itself. Speculation on the mental processes of the author takes the critic away from the work and into biography and psychology. Such studies describe process of composition, not the structure of the thing composed. And on the other hand, exploration of various readings which the work has received also takes the critic away from the work and into psychology and the history of taste. But such work, valuable and necessary as it may be, is to be distinguished from a criticism of the work itself. So, the formalist critic makes two assumptions. One, that the relevant part of the author's intention is what the author actually put into the work. That is, the critic assumes that the author's intention, as realized, is the intention that counts. And number two, the formalist critic assumes an ideal reader. That is, instead of focusing on the varying spectrum of possible readings, the critic attempts to find a central point of reference from which to focus on the structure of the poem or novel. That's it. Great, guys. So far, like basically, this is like one argument. This woman is basically saying, yes, I get it, guys, that the author's intention and the interpretation of the reader is important to understand literature, but that's not what the formalist critic does. They don't care about that stuff. They're just concerned with the work itself. Not biography, not psychology, not the history of taste. They don't care about the reader's interpretation, and they don't care about the intention of the author. They just care about the work itself. And you guys would have missed that if you would have not have read it with emotion, and we would have not have found this shift in tone right here. It gave us the entire argument. So now, if I wanted to stop reading, if I was pressed for time right here, I had like 3 minutes left, I'm going to stop because I would have stopped right here because I've found the main argument. I found the shift in tone, I found the argument, and I can predict everything else that's going to happen here if I was pressed for time. But I'm not pressed for time, so I'm going to keep reading. But does that make sense? That's basically exactly how I approach cars. I approach it as if it's any other person talking to me and telling me their argument, and things that tell me their argument are the tone that they're using. What is it that they shift? Like I said before, yeah, weightlifting is great and all, like it gives you muscle and all this stuff, but it makes you rigid and this and that, everything else. So then you know that I'm obviously not a supporter of working out or weightlifting. So let's go back to this. There is no ideal reader, of course, but for the purpose of focusing on the poem rather than the critic's own reactions, yeah, it's a defensible strategy. Besides, the alternatives are desperate. Either way, we say that one person's reading is as good as another's and thus deny the possibility of any standard reading, or else we take the lowest common denominator of the readings that have been made. That is, we frankly move from criticism into psychology. To propose such a blah, 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 blah is to split the ideal reader into a blah, 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 blah. Okay. As consequences of the distinction just referred to, the formalist critic rejects two popular tests for literary value. The first proves the value of the work from the author's sincerity. We discount also such test as the intensity of the critic's reactions. So they're literally repeating themselves over and over and over again. They're saying, yes, we get it that the author's intention and the reader's interpretation are important, but we don't concern ourselves with that. So nothing has changed, guys. And as a result, I'm not writing a single note on my paper because it's been the same thing repeated over and over and over again. A literary work is a document, and as a document can be analyzed in terms of the forces that have produced it, or it may be manipulated as a force in its own right. It mirrors the past. It may influence the future. These facts it would be futile to deny and I know of no critic who denies them. There you go. So we get the author's voice right there. And I know of no critic who denies them, but the reduction of a work of literature to its causes does not constitute literary criticism, nor does an estimate of its effects. Again, same thing over and over and over again. Good literature is more than effective rhetoric applied to true ideas. Even if we could agree upon a philosophical yardstick for measuring the truth of ideas, and even if we could find some way that transcended nose counting for determining the effectiveness of the rhetoric. So clearly, the author is in support of formalist criticism. She's saying that, yes, good literature is more than just how good it is at, rhetoric and how good it is at getting across an author's intentions, or how good it is at making the reader interpret it the way they want to interpret it. It's more than just that. There is something specific to the literature itself, and that's what we're concerned about. See, guys, that wasn't so bad. Looked scary at first, but it wasn't so bad. So there you go. According to the passage, formalist criticism focuses primarily on which of the following aspects of work. Again, what is our answer? We're saying it's about the work itself. It's not about the author or the reader. It's about the work itself. Okay. Effect on its reader? No. Especially now that these guys are both wrong. Its structure versus the truth. The truth of its ideas is, again, rhetoric. Structure is much more about the work itself, so C. Implicit in the passage is the assumption that, well, what are some assumptions? Basically they're saying that, basically they're making the argument that formalist criticism is better, they say over here, right? The alternatives are desperate. So that the way that they are analyzing, the way that they're approaching the formalist criticism is the best. That's what they're saying. It's the best. So that's the assumption they're making, is that, well, okay, I guess they're saying that the author's intention and the reader's interpretation are not as important as looking at the structure itself. So that's the assumption they're making. So let's see it. Some critical evaluations of literature are more valuable than others. That sounds actually kind of okay. Let's look at A versus B. Criticism that dismisses the author's motivations is ineffective. Criticism that dismisses the author's motivations is ineffective. So that's absolutely the opposite, correct? Like they're saying that it's effective. So A is stronger than B, so we can cross off B. A versus C. The ideal reader is one who has attempted to create a work of what? That was never said anytime. What the heck is that? Let's cross that off. Nonsense. A versus D. Good literature is nothing more than effect. No, they never said that. They said that it is more. Again, get out of here, AMC. I see your tricks. So yeah, A is the correct answer here. For which of the following conclusions does the passage offer the most support? Okay, so again, what is our answer? We're going to be basically saying the passage is about how you basically want to say that they offer the most support, saying that things like stick to the work itself. They were arguing that they argued over here that the alternatives are desperate. They're saying this and that and everything else. So it's basically you want to make sure that you have an ideal reader. We have a few different points that we can arm ourselves with. So let's see. Literature is merely potential until it's read. I don't remember any support for that, so it's questionable. Let's see, A versus B. A literary work can be analyzed in terms of the forces that produced it. Again, that's not what they're saying. So they're both kind of weak, but I'm going to go ahead and cross this off because it seems like really weak. So B versus C. The literary critic must assume an ideal reader. So they give us a lot of support for that. So we're going to cross off B. C versus D. Literary works may mirror the past or influence the future. What? Okay, that was like one phrase. So this requires me to have, so this one has the most support and least rationalization. So I know the answer is for sure going to be C. I'm going to move on. The author of the passage probably rejects the use of biography in psychology and literary criticism because these disciplines, again, what does he say, or what does she say? That, you know, they're just subjective. Like it's not going to give us what we need, you know. So they focusing on the structure of the thing itself. It's too subjective to look at the author's intentions. We don't care about the reader's interpretation. So there we go. Anything that talks about those points. A says cannot provide any information about literature. That's not true. I mean, they acknowledge that it provides things. They acknowledge that, but let's see. Versus B, A versus B. Assume, so these disciplines assume that the author's intention as realized is the only intention that counts. No. This is what the, oh wait. So assume that the author's intention as realized. Yeah, so that's what the formalist critic assumes. So the formalist critic assumes this, not the other ones. So they wouldn't reject B, they would support B. So A versus C, take into account the entire range of possible readings of a literary work. They can't. They can't. That's exactly what they're saying. They can't do that. So A versus D. Sorry, it's seems to be freezing up on me. But one second, guys. So it says, oh, there we go. So A versus D. D says they focus on the process of literary composition, not on its product. Exactly. That is much more supported because the formalist critic focuses on the product. They don't care about the process of composition. So D is a stronger answer than A, because A says cannot provide any information. I mean, like it can, it's just that D is a stronger answer. It has more support and has least rationalization. So D is the answer that I would pick there. The author of the passage would be most likely to agree. Okay, what are they going to agree with? That there's, you know, reading interpretation doesn't matter. Author's intention doesn't really matter. We focus on the structure of the thing itself. Okay. So, what would they agree with? Let's see. Literary criticism cannot be kept independent of the study of the people involved. Nope, they would agree that they can be kept independent. So let's look at that versus B. Ignorance of historical styles and usage can make for ludicrous interpretive errors. Again, they would definitely not agree, so I mean, let's just cross off one of them. A versus C. When we decide to treat a piece of language as literature, we also decide not to focus on the author's intended communication. Definitely. So we'll cross off A now. C versus D. Literature can be defined as that what is taught in English departments. Don't know if there's any support on that, guys. So it requires me to rationalize a lot. So I'm going to choose C as my answer. On the basis of the passage, one can most reasonably infer that formalist criticism has the capacity to distinguish. Again, it's about the work itself. It's always about the work itself. Valid structures from invalid ones? Sure. Versus B, one possible reading? Nope. A versus C, the authors? Nope. Nothing about the author. And then effective rhetorical styles? Nope. So, yep, structures it is. Which of the following statements, if true, would most directly challenge the principles of formalist criticism? Okay, so anything that tells us that the author's intentions and the reader's interpretations matter. You know, psychology, history, all these things matter, right? That would challenge criticism. The capacity to interpret a work of literature varies from reader to reader. No, they support that. Let's look at B. Good literature is more than just effective. Absolutely, they support that as well. So let's just get rid of this one. B versus C. Knowledge of the author's intentions is not usually reliable. Again, they agree with all these different things. Let's look at C versus D. The social and historical context of a work of literature cannot be ignored. Yes, that is definitely something that would challenge more than the other guys. So this is wrong, so D is the answer here. That's basically it, guys. So there you go. I think I have the answers here. CACD, CAD, CACD, CAD. So yeah, CACD, CACD, CAD. Awesome. 100%. Very good, guys. Okay, so any questions on that? When we're analyzing this passage, the cool part about cars is that you don't really have to make any study bucket or flashcards for it. You just got to make sure that you go through the checklist of your the strategy checklist, which we'll do in a second. But hold on. Okay. All right. So Walter says that was awesome. I'm glad that you enjoyed it, but hold on one second. Don't head out just yet. Don't head out just yet, my friend. Second question. Is this implicit or assumption question? Let's see. Implicit in the passage is the assumption that, so basically, anytime I'm looking at assumptions, I have to know the argument first. Okay? I have to know the argument. It goes hand in hand with the argument. Okay? So whenever I'm making an argument for something, if there's side A and there's side B, if there's side A and B, so the question was, is this question an implicit question or an assumption question? Let me tell you. So anytime that there is an argument, let's say there's two sides. I'm going to argue for side A. Implicit in me arguing for side A is the assumption that side A is better than B. That just happens with arguments. So all you have to do is determine what side you're choosing, and then the answer is literally describing that. See that? So anytime that there's like an implicit in the passage question, like what's the assumption of the passage, basically, like what is the author assuming? Anytime there's an argument, I don't care if it's the author or you or me or anybody else, the assumption is that this is better. Like this is my argument that this side is better than B, but that's an assumption. That's all it is. So whenever it's saying in the passage, it's talking about the overall assumption. And the overall assumption is that side A is better than side B. If it says, on the other hand, if it says, which of the following conclusions does the passage offer the most support, then you got to just look at, it might not be the whole overall passage thing, because over here, it provides a lot of support for this, but this is not the main idea. You see what I'm saying? So it just depends upon the question stem. So if it has like which of the following, you're going to have to go answer by answer and see what the answers are saying. But if it says in the passage, then you know to stick with the main idea of the passage itself. You can go ahead and say, okay, what are the sides here? What side is the author on? Okay, then all I know is that the assumption is implicit in making the argument itself. By taking a side on something, you are implicitly saying that this is much more favorable. Does that answer your question? Hope so. Yeah, so we're going to go ahead and analyze, we're going to go ahead and go through this checklist. Okay, let's see. Sometimes the questions come off too wordy. Sometimes the questions come off too wordy to follow/answer, especially after reading an entire passage. It's almost mentally draining to follow. Okay, so when it comes to being mentally drained, you can write down a few tips. Tip number 1, take a deep breath before each passage and focus yourself on the passage itself. Okay, that's number 1. Step 2, read with emotion, please. Do not get bored. I mean, you heard what I was reading, right? I was reading it with like some tone, some this, some hand motion, some head movements. I was pointing at the thing, tracing my fingers, keeping it light. Basically, I'm like, yeah, I am this author. I care about what I'm saying. I'm basically presenting this stuff to you guys, so it's interesting to me. And so what that allows me to do is keep it light. is keep it fresh. And a big thing, Gloria, because that's a good question, that's a problem that we all face, a big reason for why it becomes so, oh my God, so this and then everything else, is because you get fixated on every single word, and you're missing the forest for the trees. What is the forest in this case? It's the main idea. What is the main argument? What's the point of the entire passage? If you can get the point of the entire passage, you're set. So don't worry about getting bogged down. This is true for the scientific passages, like whatever, like if there's like a data table or something, like yeah, you want to make sure that you understand what's going on, but with cars especially, like there is an argument, there's a human being who's trying to express some sort of argument. There's almost never going to be more than one argument. You know what I mean? And if there is, then you can write down notes because that'll help you organize yourself. So instead of, so if it's one argument and this whole passage was basically the same argument over and over and over again, then that's it. Like I can rewrite this passage in one sentence. You know what I mean? I'm not going to because it's a waste of time, but I can. The point is that there is one argument here. As soon as you start to see that there's more than one argument, please, by all means, take your scratch paper and write down a bullet point. Number 1, number 2. That way you don't have to worry about organizing everything in your brain, and you can free up some space in there for the questions. So that's another tip I would say. And the last one is that, number 1, take a deep breath. Number 2, read with some emotion. And highlight the shifts in tone. Number 3 is to not miss the forest for the trees. And number 4 is that if there's more than one argument, write down the arguments on a piece of paper so that you don't have to remember them. Number 5, I would say, is with the questions themselves being wordy. Again, don't rush. Slow down. Sometimes I feel like we all have this tendency to rush to the questions because we see the clock ticking and we're going to want to have to bullet ourselves through these questions. That's not true. Think about the tortoise and the hare. Slow and steady wins the race. So when I'm reading this passage, guys, you guys could probably get through this passage faster than me. But I don't care because this is not a race. It's not a race to see who can complete the passage the fastest. It's the race for who can understand the passage the fastest. And when you look back at it, I will have understood the passage faster because I'm looking for certain things. I'm looking for the shift in tone, and I'm not getting worried about all the bogged down with these terms and all this and that everything else. I'm just saying, okay, I'm keeping it light. I'm like, okay, this guy's saying this, he's saying that, he's saying this. All right, great. So he's saying the same thing over and over and over again. Let's go to the questions. Here we go. And so that allows me to not get so bogged down. Good, you're welcome. And so the last thing is that when you're approaching this questions, Gloria, when you're reading the questions, please do not look at this stuff before attempting to at least orient yourself around the questions, what the questions is asking. So it says, according to the passage, so that's like, okay, so the answer's in the passage. Formalist criticism focuses primarily on which of the following? Well, you can answer it yourself. Like if you tell me right now, what do they focus on? The work itself. Great. Okay, let's go. Now we can look at the answer choices. Which one is about the work itself? Nope, nope, yes, nope. C. Next question. Took me 5 seconds to answer that question. So that's what I would focus on, those few things. Okay. Now I really want to go through the checklist now, and then I will unmute everybody and we can all have a discussion for the last 5-10 minutes if you have anything to say. So did I read with emotion? Yes. Did I circle and highlight the shifts in tone? I erased them, but yes, I circled. The biggest shift in tone was right here, guys. Oh my gosh. If you found this one word, you pretty much mastered the passage. That's how important this stuff is. So we found it. Awesome. Did I pay attention to the question stems? Yes, we did. We looked at, according to the passage, is a question stem. We looked at implicit in the passage is the assumption. We looked at that. We said for which of the following does the passage offer most support? Yes, we looked at that. And then things like that. Author rejects. Okay, so we looked at the question stems. We definitely make sure we broke them down. Did I use bracketing to eliminate answer choices? We did, absolutely. Did we use MSLR? Absolutely. Did we come up with an S choice E? Absolutely. Awesome. So we did all 6 of these strategies, and as a result, we crushed the passage. We got 100%. So that's it, guys. And then once you're done with that, there's no need to organize yourself or drill anything. You just keep on going to whatever other passages you want to practice. So that's it in a nutshell. Let me quickly... Okay, so if anybody has like any pressing matters they want to get, we have basically 10 more minutes. Then we can have a nice chat or so. This is a Q&A session. Anybody have anything? Just remember that by having a process to study, you'll be much, much, much more efficient with your time. You'll be able to maximize a time that you study for. So, for example, if I was studying for 500 hours and you were studying for 500 hours, I'm going to make sure that my 500 hours are much more focused and efficient than your 500 hours. Okay? How am I going to do that? I'm very motivated. Well, I wasn't for the first 22 months that I studied, but for the last 2 months I was pretty motivated. Why? Because I just wanted to get free from this freaking test, and I didn't even care about med school at that point. I was just like, I'm done. I'm done. I'm sick and tired of telling myself that, oh, maybe med school is not for me. Maybe I don't want to be a doctor. Well, my dad literally, like when I graduated college and I went back home to Phoenix, Arizona, he took me out to lunch, and he's like, I'm like telling him like, yeah, you know, Dad, like I'm kind of having doubts about med school. I don't know if it's for me. Like I have all these other interests and passions. And by the way, all of these passions and interests were absolutely true. Like I was not lying, and I still to this day am glad that, you know, whatever happened happened. But he's like, okay, Nicholas, that sounds good, but let me ask you a question. Would we be having this conversation if you'd gotten a perfect score in the MCAT? And I'm like, I don't really know how to answer that question. So that was it. That's pretty much what I needed. I needed that kick in the butt. And to say, you know what, Nicholas, all this future talk about med school this, doctor that, shadowing this, personal statement that, research this, none of it matters. I don't even have the option to go to medical school until I destroy this test. So that's the motivation I needed. And I mean, did I study? Did I study all 500 hours that I gave myself? No, I probably wasted 20% at least of my time. So imagine that I wouldn't have wasted that time. You know, I was basically like learning and like developing this process as I went. And imagine I didn't waste all that time. I mean, I probably would have gotten like a, you know, freaking 99th percentile across the board. But I don't care. It's not about that. Like I got a score that I thought was good enough. I improved my score the way that I knew was good for me. Like I could look at myself in the mirror and say, wow, okay, that makes more sense, and I could close the door on that part of my life. But yeah, I mean, that's so important that you guys stick to some process and make sure that the hours that you're studying. Dave asks, am I still planning on going to medical school? Absolutely not. I don't have any desire to. I have seriously zero desire. Like the reason why I even went on this path was because I had pressure. It was purely reputation. Like I was like, oh, you know, when I was like 16 or 17 years old, I was in college younger, guys. I graduated when I was 20 years old. I went to college when I was 16, so I was a little bit younger than my peers. And as a result, I was much more impressionable. And so for me, it was like a combination of everything. I was like, I wanted to make myself look smart. I wanted to make myself, you know, come across as like, oh, wow, look at that, look at this, look at that. I want to be a doctor. I'm going to do this. And then my family, of course, was like, hell yeah, my son's going to be a doctor. Let's do this. You know what I mean? And so, like, now I didn't want to disappoint them. And so over and over and over again, I mean, freshman, sophomore, junior, senior year, it wasn't until like senior year graduation, I was like, I had to talk with my brother, actually. I had a phone call with my brother. And I was like, dude, I don't know who to talk to. I don't want to do this. I don't want to go to med school. I don't want to apply. He's like, then don't. He's like, Nicholas, look at me. I'm an aerospace engineer. I have this and this salary. He's also incredibly young for a graduate. He was ridiculously well ahead of his time and peers. But he's like, but let me ask you a question, Nicholas. Am I happy? I'm like, no, you seem pretty miserable in your job. He's like, exactly. So don't make the same mistake I am, and take a few years and figure it out for yourself. And so with his advice plus my dad's question, I basically crushed the MCAT. And then immediately when I got my score back, I was like, Okay, that's it. I'm done, and I'm going to move on to other stuff. And yeah, so I absolutely am not going to, Dave. It's a good question. I right now, currently, I'm a project manager for 4.5 different startup companies. My goal is I have 3 areas that are important to me: education, health, and sustainability. So I want to approach it the way that I can approach it, with creativity and logic and things like that. And so I want to make sure that I, just basically that, how would Nicholas approach education? How would Nicholas approach healthcare? How would Nicholas approach sustainability? So I did that, and I was like, well, crap, okay, I just spent all this time. I have a degree in chemistry and philosophy, and now I took the MCAT, but now I don't know anything about business. What do I do? And so my father was basically like, okay, go to business school. And I'm like, no, I hate school. I don't want to go back again. So I basically, I had a really hard time, guys. Like, I had 6 months where I was in pretty bad, like living situations, like couch surfing, and I mean, I still don't have any furniture in my apartment here, but luckily I have a bed, which is nice. But I was basically standing with my laptop in my kitchen, moving aside some cups in the cupboard, and basically just trying to build and learn and grow myself into the person that I want to become. And meanwhile, I was applying to so many different jobs, trying to find somebody who can give me the opportunity that I wanted. And, long story short, from September to March, after going through a bit of hell, which was fun, by the way. You know why it was fun? You know why I wanted to do it? Because I was free, right? Think about entropy. I was finally free. And so it didn't really bother me too much that I had to do this. I had to do some, really odd jobs, but I got to the point where I'm like, the MCAT gave me so much confidence, guys, you have no idea. Like, being able to, basically I have this process, and I have the character built to where I can basically go 10-week sprints at a time. Like, if I want to say, I want to teach myself this, okay, I'm going to give myself 500 hours, and I'm so used to learning so rapidly now because of the MCAT that I can learn anything if I care about it enough. And that's, again, what brings me back to this: process to study and motivation to commit. So, yes, I was done with medical school, but I was not done with health. I was not done with education. I was not done with these things, but I just didn't want to do it from the route of an MD. I wanted to do it from the route of an entrepreneur. So here I am. And then let me see. Dave says, understood. Lots of people are pressured by their parents to become professionals, especially to become doctors. Too many people go into fields because of money and status rather than what they, for example, you, really want to do. Life is too short to do what others, even your parents, want you to do. And Walter says, agreed. I agree too, man. I think that it's a great place to end it. If you guys don't have any other specific questions, really proud of you guys. I know that each individually you have your own stories. All I can do is share my story and hope that some of it resonates with you guys. I hope this was helpful. This is all being recorded, so you get the recordings. And for those of you who are watching at home, again, keep it up, guys. Let me know if you have any questions. Here's a way to contact me right here. SecondChanceMCAT.com, Nicholas at SecondChanceMCAT.com. Guys, a lot of exciting things that are happening in the future. I'm really working hard to making sure that this is as valuable of a community as possible, but I can only do it with your participation, so I really appreciate it again. And so with that being said, I will see you next Sunday, 10 a.m. Pacific time, and I'll talk to you soon. So let me stop the recording here.